She was mocked, humiliated and thrown out like trash, all because of her appearance. They said she was too ugly to serve coffee to rich people. But what no one knew was that the very man she served in silence would one day bring her back not as a waitress, but as his equal. What did he see in her that the world refused to? And why, even after losing everything, did he never forget her face? Emily Harper had always known she was different. While other girls spent hours perfecting their makeup or taking selfies under perfect lighting, Emily woke up before sunrise to catch the bus and mop the floors of Brew and Gold, one of the fanciest cafes downtown. Her uniform was slightly loose, her shoes always a little too worn, and her face, well, according to her manager, not marketable. Every morning she tied her chestnut hair into a bun, hid behind her thick glasses and tried to smile through the whispers. The other waitresses never included her in their conversations, and customers rarely made eye contact. Still, Emily remained kind. She remembered orders by heart, offered refills without being asked, and always gave the warmest goodbyes, even when no one replied. But nothing she did was ever enough. One Monday morning she arrived 5 minutes early and found her locker open. Her old sweater, the one she wore on breaks, was on the floor, soaked in mop water. She knelt quietly, picking it up. "Oops," giggled Amanda, the head waitress. "Didn't see you there. Or maybe I just forgot you existed." The others laughed and Emily forced a smile. She never cried at work. That same day, a tall, quiet man entered the cafe. His tailored grey suit and the scar near his jaw made him stand out. He sat by the window, ordered a black coffee, and kept his eyes on a small leather notebook. Emily, assigned to that section, approached carefully. "Good morning, sir. Would you like cream or sugar with that?" He looked up. For a moment, their eyes met. "No," he said, voice deep but calm. "This is perfect." He didn't glance at her name tag, didn't look her up and down like most did. He simply accepted the cup with a nod and returned to his writing. Emily walked away without thinking much. Just another stranger in a city full of them. But she didn't notice. He kept watching her, not with desire, not with pity, with something else, something deeper. Later that day, a wealthy woman in pearls snapped her fingers at Emily. "You call this coffee? It's lukewarm!" she shrieked, tossing the cup toward her tray. It splashed across Emily's sleeve. The cafe went silent. The manager rushed over. "Emily, this is the third time this week. We can't keep apologizing for you. Go clean up." "But," she whispered, voice trembling, "it wasn't." "Now," he barked. She turned, biting her lip, holding back tears. As she walked toward the back, she passed the man in the grey suit again. He hadn't turned a page in his notebook. His eyes were on her. She didn't know it yet, but that moment had changed everything. The next day, Emily stepped into the cafe with a forced smile. Her shift started at 8, but she'd arrived at 7:30, just to avoid the crowd of co-workers who always had something cruel to say. She tied her apron, straightened her posture, and told herself today would be different. It wasn't. At 8:05, a large corporate group entered. Suits, heels, booming voices. They occupied 4 tables near the center, demanding attention. Amanda, the head waitress, took charge, assigning tables and barking orders like a drill sergeant. Emily was given the most difficult one, the center table, where the bossy woman from yesterday sat again. Emily approached cautiously, pen and pad in hand. "Good morning. Welcome back," she began softly. The woman raised an eyebrow. "You again?" Emily nodded politely. "Can I start you off with drinks?" Before she could finish, the woman scoffed loudly, waving toward Amanda. "Is this really your staff now? First you serve me a waitress with a face that makes me lose my appetite, and now she's speaking to me again?" The cafe went dead silent. Emily's ears burned red, her hands trembling slightly. Amanda rushed over, clearly enjoying the attention. "I apologize, Mrs. Lancaster," she said with syrupy sweetness. We've been meaning to speak to her about presentation. The room filled with low murmurs. Someone chuckled. Someone else muttered, "She is kind of scary looking." Emily lowered her gaze, heart pounding. Amanda turned to her with a smirk. "Why don't you take your break, Emily? A long one." Emily nodded, numb, and walked out the back door. The air outside was cold, but her face burned. She found herself behind the building, near the dumpsters, sitting on a milk crate. Her hands gripped the sides of her apron as tears quietly fell down her cheeks. Inside the cafe, the man in the grey suit had returned. He'd watched the entire scene unfold from his usual seat by the window. He looked down at the coffee she'd served him, still warm, still perfect, and then back at the door she had just exited. He stood up. Amanda saw him leave and smiled. "Guess he didn't like the atmosphere," she joked to another waitress. But the man wasn't gone. He stood outside near the alley, watching Emily from a distance. He didn't approach. Not yet. He simply observed the way she wiped her tears without letting herself sob, the strength she had to remain small in a world that constantly tried to crush her. He left quietly. By the time Emily returned inside, her manager was waiting. "Pack your things," he said coldly. "You're done here." Emily blinked. "What?" "You make people uncomfortable. We can't afford that kind of feedback from clients like Mrs. Lancaster. She said your face ruined her morning. That's enough for us." No final warning. No second chance. She was officially fired for being too ugly. And as she walked out with her few belongings in a small paper bag, the man in the grey suit was already dialing a number on his phone. His voice was steady, but his words were sharp. "Find out everything you can about the girl who just left Brew and Gold." His name was Ethan Maddox, a man whose name echoed through real estate boardrooms and luxury hotel investment meetings, yet rarely appeared in tabloids. He wasn't the kind of millionaire who flaunted wealth. No flashy sports cars, no red carpet appearances. Ethan lived with a purpose, quietly powerful, deeply private. But ever since that day in the cafe, something in him had shifted. He couldn't get her out of his mind. It wasn't just the way she served coffee, or the grace with which she endured humiliation. It was the way she stood back up, as if the world hadn't just tried to break her. That kind of strength was rare and unforgettable. His assistant, Jules, entered his penthouse office later that afternoon, holding a slim folder. "Her name's Emily Harper," she said. 26, lives in a rented room in a boarding house on 5th and Bay. No college degree, no criminal record, no social media. "Family?" Ethan asked, eyes never leaving the window. "Mother is bedridden. No father in the picture. She's been supporting them both on minimum wage jobs for years." He turned, finally meeting Jules's eyes. "And yet they fired her for her face." Jules hesitated. "I think they just needed an excuse." Ethan nodded slowly. "Keep tabs on her, quietly. I want to know if she needs anything, medicine, food, anything at all." Jules raised an eyebrow. "Are we helping her or recruiting her?" Ethan looked out the window again, watching the city stretch beneath him. "Neither," he said. "We're watching someone the world chose to ignore. That's always where you find the most extraordinary people." Meanwhile, Emily was walking the long stretch back home, her paper bag of belongings digging into her arm. She had no idea anyone had taken interest in her. Her mind replayed the cruel words, the laughter, the shame, and the stranger. For some reason, his face kept flashing through her memory, calm, unreadable, but kind. The way he looked at her wasn't like the others. It wasn't disgust or pity. It was something else. Back in her tiny rented room, Emily laid the bag down next to a small space heater. Her mother, Carol, lay in a reclined chair, coughing weakly. "Hey, sweetheart," her mother whispered. "How was work?" Emily paused for a long moment, then forced a smile. "It was fine, Mama. Just tiring." Carol smiled faintly, not seeing the tears that welled up in her daughter's eyes. Across town, Ethan sat at his grand piano, a rare moment of solitude. His fingers hovered over the keys, but he didn't play. He was thinking about her, the invisible girl with the quiet strength and the unforgettable eyes. Emily returned to the cafe the next morning, desperate to plead her case. She wore a scarf to hide the bags under her eyes and clutched a small envelope in her hand. A thank you letter she had written to her manager, hoping to remind him of her loyalty. But when she arrived, her employee badge didn't work. She stood outside in the cold, knocking lightly on the glass. Amanda opened the door a crack. "Oh," she said with a fake smile. "Didn't you get the message? You're done here, Emily. The manager doesn't want to cause a scene." Emily tried to hand her the envelope. Amanda didn't take it. She just stared with narrowed eyes. "Honestly, I warned you. This isn't the kind of place where trolls fit in." And then she closed the door. Emily stood frozen, the envelope still in her hand, her heart pounding so loudly it felt like the whole street could hear it. People passed her by. Some stared, no one stopped. She walked away slowly, her shoes scraping the sidewalk like dead weight. Her phone buzzed, an alert about rent being due. Another message reminded her her mother's medication refill was ready, but it wouldn't be covered without a paycheck. She sank onto a park bench and stared at the sky. It was one of those blue-grey mornings that smelled like coming rain, and it felt like the world had chosen to be cruel all at once. That night, Ethan sat at his dining table alone, swirling a glass of wine he didn't want to drink. His assistant had updated him. Emily had been officially let go, no notice, no severance. The cafe had even denied her last paycheck, claiming damages for a spilled coffee. "She didn't spill it," Ethan muttered to himself. He remembered that clearly. It was thrown. He stood pacing the room. Something about the injustice gnawed at him like a stone in his shoe. But this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everything she represented, how society treated those it deemed less than. He called Jules again. "I want her safe," he said. "Make sure she doesn't go hungry. And if she does, I want to be the one to feed her." Meanwhile, Emily walked home carrying only a bag of groceries she'd paid for with her last few dollars. At the corner of her street, she noticed a commotion. A car had crashed into a streetlight, steam rising from under the hood. A small crowd had formed, but no one stepped in. Then she saw the driver, slumped over the steering wheel. Without hesitation, Emily ran toward the wreck, heart racing. She yanked the door open. The man inside was bleeding from the forehead, barely conscious. "Stay with me," she whispered, unbuckling his seatbelt. "You're going to be okay. Help is coming." He opened his eyes, dazed, and for a second they locked eyes. It was him, the man from the cafe. He blinked, dazed, but managed one sentence before passing out completely. "I never forgot your face." The rain had started falling in thin, icy threads as Emily waited beside the man she'd just pulled from the car. Sirens howled in the distance, growing louder. Her jacket was soaked, her knees scraped from the pavement, but she didn't move. She held his head gently, whispering, "You're okay. You're safe now." When the paramedics arrived, they worked quickly, lifting the unconscious man onto a stretcher. One of them glanced at her and asked, "Are you family?" She hesitated. "No, just someone who couldn't walk away." He nodded with quiet respect. "Then you probably saved his life." Emily stood in silence as the ambulance drove away, lights flashing, leaving only the smell of gasoline and wet asphalt behind. She didn't know his name. She had no idea that the man she'd just saved was worth over $200 million. To her, he was simply someone in need. She walked home in silence, her shoes squishing with every step. That night, she sat beside her mother, spoon-feeding her soup and trying not to think about how close she'd come to having nothing. Across the city, in the ER of a private hospital, Ethan Maddox opened his eyes slowly. His head throbbed, and his vision was blurry. Jules stood beside the bed, phone in hand. "What happened?" he asked, voice hoarse. "You were in an accident," she said. "You lost control of the car near 5th and Bay, hit a pole. You're lucky to be alive." He blinked slowly. Then he whispered, "The girl. Was she real?" Jules frowned. "What girl?" "The one who pulled me out. She had brown eyes, glasses. She spoke to me like she cared, like she saw me." Jules looked skeptical. "Ethan, there were no names. The report said she left before police arrived." He stared at the ceiling. "I saw her again. Emily. She's the one who saved me." Jules raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? Could it really have been her?" He nodded slowly. "I'd recognize that face anywhere." Back in her small apartment, Emily finally allowed herself to break. She curled into a blanket on the floor and cried. Not just from exhaustion, but from something else, something she didn't understand. For the first time in a long while, she had acted purely from instinct, and it had felt right. She didn't know that her act of kindness had already set off a chain reaction, that the man she saved would remember her forever, or that she had just saved the life of the one person who had the power to completely change hers. Ethan spent 3 days in the hospital, but his thoughts never left the girl who had pulled him from the wreck. In the sterile silence of his private room, he stared at the ceiling, tracing her face in his mind. Not perfect, not polished, but unforgettable. Kindness had a shape that no surgeon could replicate, and she wore it like armor. He didn't tell anyone, but every night he asked the nurses if anyone had come looking for him. Each time, they shook their heads. "She just disappeared," Jules said during her next visit. "No one saw her leave. There's no footage, not even a name." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. "She didn't want credit." Jules studied him. "Are you sure this isn't just gratitude talking?" "No," he said softly. "It's memory, clearer than anything else." Back in her small apartment, Emily resumed life the only way she knew how, quietly. She found a temporary cleaning job at a laundromat across town. It paid less than the cafe, but it was enough for groceries. Her mother's medication was now being rationed. At night, Emily replayed the crash in her head. His voice echoed, "I never forgot your face." But she couldn't imagine someone like him remembering her. She convinced herself it was just adrenaline talking. He probably had no clue who she was. But she was wrong. Ethan hired a private investigator, not to stalk her, but to find her, to help her, to understand how the world had failed someone so kind, so selfless, so invisible to everyone else but him. "She saved my life," he told the investigator. But it wasn't just about the accident. She saved me from forgetting what decency looks like. Every update the investigator brought back revealed more about Emily's world. Her unpaid bills, her lack of heat in the winter, her mother's failing health. Ethan felt anger rise in him like a slow fire. No one should have to survive like that, especially not someone like her. And yet she never complained, never reached out, never asked for help. She vanished, back into the shadows. Ethan began visiting every volunteer center and low-cost clinic in the city, hoping their paths would cross again. He didn't want to scare her. He didn't even know what he would say. He just knew he needed to see her again. One night, as he stood by his window, watching the city lights blink like stars, he whispered to himself, "I owe her more than thanks. I owe her a chance." Emily, meanwhile, stood outside a pharmacy, counting change in her hand. The wind bit through her thin coat, but she didn't flinch. Somewhere in the city, the man she saved was already moving mountains to find her, and she had no idea. Ethan Maddox was a man who closed billion-dollar deals before breakfast. Yet no amount of success had ever left him feeling as alive or as restless as he did now. His board meetings became distractions. His penthouse, once a symbol of triumph, now felt hollow. He didn't want another contract. He wanted to find her. The private investigator brought him scraps, reports of a girl fitting Emily's description, working odd jobs, applying at shelters, volunteering at a church soup kitchen in the East End. But by the time Ethan got there, she was always gone. He stopped wearing suits, swapped his Aston Martin for a used black sedan, put on a baseball cap and wandered streets where people didn't know his name. For the first time in years, Ethan moved through the city not as a tycoon, but as a man chasing hope. One rainy Thursday, he walked into a small community center near Lincoln Park. The woman at the front desk smiled politely. "Looking to volunteer?" "Looking for someone," Ethan said, voice low. She handed him a clipboard. "So are a lot of people. Write down what you know." He scribbled her name, Emily Harper. Meanwhile, Emily was mopping floors in the back of a corner store. Her shoes squeaked against the linoleum as she hummed to herself softly. The owner, an older man named Mr. Delgado, treated her kindly and paid her under the table. It wasn't much, but it was quiet, and no one mocked her there. She didn't know that a man in a dark coat had just passed the store's front window, nor that he paused just for a second before walking on. That night, Ethan returned home and stared at a photograph the investigator had taken weeks earlier. A blurry shot of Emily exiting a food bank, her hair tucked under a beanie, her eyes tired but still warm. "She's not lost," he whispered. "She's just hiding from a world that doesn't deserve her." At the same time, Emily sat on her bed, eating instant noodles, wondering if she'd ever feel seen again. Her mother's condition was worsening, and Emily felt helpless, like she was running on a treadmill that only moved backward. Neither of them knew they were getting closer. Each day, Ethan searched another part of the city. Each night, Emily avoided the places he'd already been. It was fate playing games. But fate would soon grow tired of hiding her. Emily Harper had learned to live without expecting much. Days blurred into one another, working small cleaning jobs, buying generic soup cans, stretching every dollar like it was her last. Her world had shrunk to a routine of survival, but even in that darkness, she never let go of her gentleness. Each morning began the same. She'd check her mother's pulse, warm water for tea, help Carol sit up and read aloud from the Bible or one of her mother's favorite romance paperbacks. Emily didn't believe much in fairy tales anymore, but she loved how her mother's face softened during those stories. In her heart, though, Emily had begun to feel like a ghost. She passed through crowds without being noticed, through life without being remembered. And yet, somewhere across the city, a man was remembering her every second. Ethan had mapped the city by now. He had spoken to soup kitchens, janitors, crossing guards, anyone who might have seen a girl with kind eyes and a quiet voice. They'd all seen someone like her, but always too late. He carried the investigator's photo in his wallet, a blurry, imperfect photo of the one face he couldn't forget. At night, he sat on rooftops of buildings he owned, looking down at the streets, wondering how someone so remarkable could vanish so easily. Meanwhile, Emily's situation worsened. Carol's health declined rapidly. Her medications ran low. Emily applied for assistance programs, but the waiting lists were long and the paperwork cruel. She began volunteering at a church food pantry, not just for access to meals, but for the peace it brought her. For a few hours, she wasn't a burdened daughter. She was a helper, a giver, a light, even if dim. It was there in the shadows of the church basement that her story almost crossed Ethan's once again. He had visited the church just days before, asking if they needed donations. A coordinator mentioned a young woman who had recently joined the team. Ethan left a check and his number. "If she ever asks about me," he said, "tell her I want to thank her." Emily never did. She remained hidden, unaware that the man she thought had forgotten her was leaving breadcrumbs of hope everywhere she went. She believed her act of kindness had faded into the wind, a moment lost, a man she'd never see again. But fate was not done, and very soon her name would be on every news feed in the city. It began with a small human interest article buried on page 6 of the local paper, a piece most people would have skimmed over with their morning coffee. But for Ethan Maddox, it was everything. Mysterious woman saves business tycoon from fiery crash, then disappears. The photo was grainy, taken from a nearby security camera. A young woman, barely visible through the smoke and chaos, pulling a man from a car. The article didn't name her, but it described her. Petite, dark hair in a bun, glasses, no coat. Just courage. Ethan froze when he saw it. He held the paper like it was a treasure map. "That's her," he whispered. "That's Emily." He called Jules immediately. "I need you to amplify this. Reach out to every local channel. Tell them I want to find her. Tell them I'm not leaving this city until I do." Within hours, the story was everywhere. Talk shows, online blogs, evening broadcasts. Who is the mystery woman who saved Ethan Maddox? Became the city's newest obsession. But while the city watched with curiosity, Emily watched with disbelief. She stood in the corner store's break room, staring at the tiny TV above the fridge. The screen showed a news anchor holding up her blurry image next to a photo of Ethan, clean-cut and smiling from a business gala. "Ethan Maddox has announced a personal reward for any information about the woman who pulled him from a burning car 2 weeks ago. He calls her the woman who reminded me what grace looks like." Emily's knees went weak. Her co-worker, Mr. Delgado, looked at her, then at the screen. "That's you, isn't it?" She didn't respond, because she didn't know what scared her more. The idea that Ethan remembered her, or the idea that the world might finally see her. Back at home, her mother had seen the news too. Carol clutched Emily's hand, teary-eyed. "He's looking for you, sweetheart. You changed his life." "I didn't mean to," Emily whispered. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," her mother said, voice trembling. "Not anyone. Just you." Emily thought about it all night. The article, the photo, Ethan's voice saying he wanted to find her. Her heart raced at the thought of seeing him again. But another part of her, the one still bruised by years of being overlooked, whispered, "What if he changes his mind when he sees you again? What if you're not what he remembers?" And so, the next morning, she made a decision. She would go to the church. She would keep her head down. And she would pray he never found her. But fate had already decided. The next chapter of her life was already walking through that very door. It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind of day where the sky sat low and heavy over the city, threatening rain but never delivering. Inside the community church, Emily moved boxes of canned food onto dusty shelves, trying to ignore the pit growing in her stomach. Everywhere she went, someone was talking about the hero girl. Someone even brought up the news story again, joking, "Imagine being the one to save Ethan Maddox. Bet she's getting married into billions by now." Emily smiled politely, then disappeared into the storage room. She didn't know that Ethan had already entered the church. He wore no suit, no tie, just a worn hoodie and jeans. The volunteers thought he was just another man coming to donate. One of the pastors greeted him kindly, and Ethan asked softly, "Does a young woman named Emily volunteer here?" The pastor's eyes flicked with recognition. "Why do you ask?" "She saved my life," Ethan said, "and I need to thank her." The pastor hesitated. then nodded slowly. She's in the back room, stacking donations. Ethan's heartbeat quickened as he walked quietly down the hallway, past worn posters and peeling paint. Every step felt like walking through a dream, one that might vanish if he breathed too loudly. Emily was kneeling beside a box of soup cans when she heard footsteps. She didn't look up right away. Then she froze. Something in her spine recognized the silence, the presence. She turned slowly, and there he was. Ethan. Not in a tailored suit, not on a magazine cover, but real, raw, with eyes full of everything he hadn't said. Their eyes met. Emily dropped the can she was holding. He didn't speak at first, just looked at her, his chest rising and falling, like he was afraid to blink and lose her again. "I knew it was you," he finally said, voice hoarse. "I looked everywhere." Emily stood slowly, eyes wide, her breath caught in her throat. "Why?" "Because you pulled me from the wreck, but I was already broken long before that. And when you looked at me, it was the first time someone saw more than just money or success. You saw a man who needed saving." "I didn't do anything special," she whispered. "You did everything," he said, "and I've never stopped thinking about you." Emily's hands trembled. "I thought maybe you wouldn't remember me, or you'd be disappointed." Ethan stepped forward, his voice softer now. "I remembered your eyes, your voice, your strength. I remembered everything." Tears welled in hers. "I'm not like the people you know. I'm just me. And that's exactly who I've been searching for." For a long moment, they stood in silence. Two souls stitched by fate, reunited by something deeper than chance. Outside, it began to rain softly against the church windows. But inside, it finally felt like spring. They sat in the back pew of the church for what felt like hours. The air was thick with everything unsaid, and yet neither of them rushed. It wasn't time for grand declarations. It was time for truth. "I didn't think you'd come," Emily said softly, her hands resting nervously in her lap. "I mean, why would you?" Ethan looked at her gently. "Because you're the only person who's ever seen me. And not the money around me, not the name, just me." She let out a shaky breath. "I didn't want anything from you." "I know," he said. "That's why I couldn't stop looking for you." She hesitated, then spoke again. "My mom is sick. I've been working 2, sometimes 3 jobs just to keep us going. When I saw your accident, I didn't think, I just ran." Ethan swallowed hard. "You saved my life, Emily, and not just the one in that car. You saved the one I didn't even know I was losing. I forgot what real felt like, what kindness looked like." Tears welled in her eyes. "People have always said I was plain, forgettable, ugly even. It's hard to believe anything else when the world repeats it every day." Ethan turned toward her, eyes dark with emotion. "Then the world is blind. Because I remember you, not for how you looked, but for how you made me feel, seen, safe." Emily wiped her cheek, laughing nervously. "This is crazy. You're Ethan Maddox. You could be with anyone." He shook his head. "I don't want anyone. I want the girl who didn't walk away, the girl who could have let a stranger die but didn't." She looked down, quiet for a moment. Then, barely above a whisper, she asked, "So, what now?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a single photo. It was the blurry image the private investigator had taken of her weeks ago. He'd folded it, kept it close, protected it. "This is all I had," he said, handing it to her. "But now I have the real thing." She took it with trembling fingers. Outside, the sun began to break through the clouds for the first time in days. He stood. Come with me. Let me show you a life where you don't have to hide, where your worth isn't tied to looks or status. Just you. Emily stood too, hesitant, heart pounding. I don't need saving, Ethan. He smiled. I know. I just want to walk beside the one who saved me. And for the first time in her life, she believed someone meant it. 2 weeks later, the Golden Brew and Gold Cafe looked exactly the same. Polished floors, overpriced lattes, and employees still wearing fake smiles. But on this particular morning, something felt different. The doors opened, and in walked a woman who once had to sneak through the back door, unseen and unloved. Emily Harper. Her hair was down, soft waves cascading over her shoulders. She wore a tailored cream blouse and sleek black slacks, no glasses, no apron. Her chin was lifted with quiet dignity, and at her side, holding her hand, was Ethan Maddox. The same Ethan Maddox whose face was now printed on the donation plaques inside the cafe, after he purchased the entire chain the week before. Heads turned, mouths dropped. Amanda, still working the front counter, nearly dropped a tray of croissants. Emily walked up to the counter slowly, calmly. She glanced at the menu, then smiled. "1 black coffee, please. No sugar, no cream." Amanda blinked, stunned. I used to work here," Emily said, voice even. "But I guess I just wasn't pretty enough for the job." Amanda looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. I didn't know." "You didn't care," Ethan cut in, his voice cold and steady. "You judged someone who had more heart in her pinky finger than most people carry their whole lives." The manager appeared from the back, his face draining of color when he saw Ethan. "Mr. Maddox, I wasn't aware you'd be visiting this location." "Oh, I'm not just visiting," Ethan said, slipping an envelope onto the counter. "This is the final transfer. Emily's now a 50% owner of this branch." The cafe went dead silent. Emily stepped forward. "Don't worry. I won't fire anyone. I don't need revenge. I just want to build a place where people are seen for their soul, not their skin." Amanda looked down, humiliated. Emily turned, coffee in hand, and walked out with Ethan beside her. The bell above the door chimed like a final note of closure. Outside, reporters waited, hoping for a statement. Emily looked directly into the camera and smiled. "Sometimes, the world tries to tell you you're invisible. But kindness doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. It just needs to be true." And with that, she walked into a future she never thought she'd have, not as a forgotten face, but as a woman remembered for the light she carried, even in the darkest of rooms. They told her she was too plain to be noticed, too quiet to be remembered, too ugly to belong. And yet, in the end, Emily Harper wasn't just remembered. She became unforgettable, not because she changed who she was, but because someone finally saw her for who she had always been. A heart like hers couldn't stay hidden forever, and neither can yours. So tell me, have you ever felt invisible? Has the world ever judged you by your looks before your soul? Let's talk about it in the comments. Your story matters more than you know. If this story moved you, if it made you cry, or smile, or maybe even hope again, consider clicking the Super Thanks button. Your financial support helps this channel grow and reach even more hearts that need these stories. Every Super Thanks helps us create more powerful content and reminds us we're not alone. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that could change your day, or maybe your life. And before you go, click the video that's now on your screen. Trust me, it's another emotional journey you won't want to miss.